An 8-year-old girl walked into her mother's workplace to say the words her mother had been too afraid to say for 6 weeks, and she never got to finish them. Her name was Riley Ellis. She wore a purple hoodie with a paint stain on the left cuff. She was shaking, not from cold, the diner ran hot even in October, but from the decision she had made on the walk over and was no longer sure about now that she was standing here. In her hands was a piece of paper, folded twice, softened at the creases. One corner printed in red, the pharmacy's way of saying time had run out. The man in the corner booth was eating alone. Mid-50s, plain gray jacket over dark flannel, clothes that announced nothing. His coffee was half empty. A folded newspaper sat beside his plate, unread. He watched the room without seeming to. The particular stillness of someone who had spent years learning how to pay attention without being noticed doing it. Riley had watched him come in 3 times that week. Same order every time. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee. He always tipped in cash. He always said thank you when her mother set the plate down. And he meant it. She could tell. She cleared her throat. "Excuse me." He looked up. Eyes calm, unhurried. She held out the paper. "My mom works so hard," she said, "but the boss won't." She did not get to finish. A hand came from the side, fast, flat. The hand of a man accustomed to moving through spaces as if he owned them, because he did, and snatched the paper clean out of her grip. Victor Kane was 46, built wide through the shoulders, with a face that had settled into something permanently unimpressed. White dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a ring on his right hand he liked to tap against hard surfaces when making a point. He had owned the Maple Grove Diner for 11 years and had very specific opinions about who got to ask questions inside it. He looked at the paper. He looked at Riley. He looked at the paper again. Then he crumpled it, deliberately, slowly, making sure the sound carried across the room, and dropped it onto the nearest bus tray on top of used napkins and a half-eaten plate of home fries. "If you don't like it here," he said, loud enough for everyone, "there's the door." Riley did not move. She stared at the bus tray, at the red corner of the paper barely visible under the napkins. Her hands, which had been shaking, went completely still. There were about 20 people in the diner. Some looked over. Most looked away just as quickly. That reflex, faster than sympathy, that decides something is not your business before you have fully registered what you just saw. Kendra Ellis came through the kitchen door at a half-run, drying her hands on her apron. She had seen Riley cross the floor from across the room and felt her stomach drop the instant she recognized what her daughter was carrying. She had told her. She had told her not to bring it here. "Riley." Low, urgent. "Baby, come here." She reached her daughter, put both hands on her shoulders, turned her gently away from Victor, and looked up at him. "I'm sorry. She shouldn't have." Victor did not let her finish. He looked past Kendra, at the room, as if what he was about to say was addressed to a broader audience, and she was incidental to it. "Some people," he said, "should just know their place." The words landed like something dropped from a height. 2 tables over, a man in a John Deere cap, a regular, someone Kendra had served enough times that she knew he took his coffee with 2 sugars and always asked about her daughter by name, raised his phone. Not to call anyone, to record. He didn't stand, he didn't speak. He just pointed the camera at the center of the room and let it run. Nobody else moved. Nobody said anything. Riley was still staring at the bus tray. She had gone somewhere very quiet inside herself. Not the quiet of defeat, but the quiet of a child who has absorbed more than children should be asked to absorb, and is doing the only thing she knows how to do with it: hold still and not look away. The man in the gray jacket had not raised his phone. He had not moved at all. His hands were flat on the table. He was watching Riley. The way her chin had lifted slightly, the way she pressed her lips together, the way she looked like she was deciding something again, even now, even standing in the middle of this. His coffee sat untouched. He set his fork down very quietly. Kendra smoothed her daughter's hair back with one hand, whispered something only Riley could hear, then straightened, tucked her apron string back into place, and walked back to the floor. 3 tables were still waiting. She needed this job. For now. Her alarm went off at 4:45 every morning. Not because her shift started that early, it started at 6, but because Kendra needed the hour. She needed to pack Riley's lunch, check the inhaler was in the backpack, lay out clothes, and get herself ready before the apartment started being what it actually was. Small, cold at the baseboards in October, held together by a schedule that had no room for anything to fall apart. She had lived in Crestwood, Ohio her entire life, grew up 3 blocks from where she lived now, in a neighborhood that had gotten smaller over the years, not in size, but in what it offered. The hardware store was a payday loan place. The pharmacy had closed and reopened as a dollar store. The Maple Grove Diner was one of the few businesses left on that stretch of Maple Avenue with real foot traffic, which was part of why she had taken the job there when Riley was 3, after Riley's father made clear he was not staying. Kendra was 39. She carried herself straight-backed, chin level, watchful. Her hands were the only part of her that showed the work, dry at the knuckles, 2 fingers bandaged where the skin had cracked and wasn't healing. She kept a small tin of hand cream in her apron pocket and used it on her break when no one was watching, the way some women apply perfume. She had worked at Maple Grove for 6 years. The first 4 were unremarkable, in the way honest work is often unremarkable. Early hours, decent regulars, a boss who mostly left her alone. Then, 8 months ago, something shifted. Small at first. Good Saturday shifts redistributed, hours trimmed at the edges, new side work requirements added without documentation, without additional pay. When she had asked once, quietly, in the small office off the kitchen, Victor had looked at her the way he looked at minor inconveniences and said, "I'm not sure why you think you're in a position to ask questions." She had not asked again. The pay issue started 6 weeks ago. The first short deposit she flagged as an accounting error. Victor said the system was being updated. The following week, there was no deposit at all. He said there was a discrepancy in her hours under review. She should be patient. 6 weeks of patient. She was in the middle of her 2nd consecutive shift when the call came in. She took it in the narrow hallway behind the kitchen, phone pressed close because the exhaust fan ran loud. The landlord's property manager. 48 hours to make a partial payment, or they would begin the process. She said yes, she understood, she would figure it out. She hung up and stood against the wall for a moment with her eyes closed. She had $11 in her wallet. She went back to the floor. At the corner table nearest the window, Riley's table on Friday afternoons, the one that always smelled like maple syrup, her daughter was bent over her homework. Kendra watched her between table orders, the way mothers watch without making it obvious. Then Riley coughed, a short, dry sound, barely audible over the diner noise. She immediately looked up to see if her mother had heard, then dropped her eyes back to her notebook with the exaggerated focus of a child pretending to be fine. Her hand moved to her jacket pocket. Her expression tightened, a small, controlled pull around the mouth, and her fingers searched the pocket a second time, then went still. The inhaler was not there. She glanced at her backpack at the far end of the booth, then back at her homework. She pressed her lips together and kept writing. She was 8 years old, and she was covering for herself. Kendra had seen all of it from 12 feet away. She finished delivering the order in her hand, walked to the back corridor, turned away from the pass-through window, and pressed the heel of her palm hard against her eyes. She held it there for 3 seconds. Then she straightened, wiped her face, retucked her apron. On the way back to the floor, she passed the mason jar by the register. the one someone had placed there 2 weeks ago for the Garza boy 2 doors down, 9 years old, leukemia. She had $14 in her apron from the morning shift. She pulled out 2 of them and folded them into the jar without stopping, without ceremony. Then she picked up her order pad and went back to her tables. She had a rule she had carried since she was young, since she had watched her own mother come home from cleaning other people's houses and still make dinner and still ask about Kendra's day and still find something in the evening worth a smile. The rule was, no matter how bad her own day is, she will not make anyone else's worse. Then she picked up her order pad and went back to her tables. The schedule change happened on a Thursday. Kendra came in for her regular morning shift and found her name missing from 2 of her 3 consistent weekend slots. In their place, a newer hire, a young woman 3 weeks in, whose primary qualification appeared to be that she laughed at Victor's jokes. Kendra asked about it at the end of her shift. Victor didn't look up from the desk. Business decision. I need people who can adapt. I've been adapting for 6 years, she said. He looked up then, slow, the expression of a man whose time had been mildly wasted. People like you, he said, should stop making excuses. He said it the way you say the weather is turning, like a reasonable observation. Kendra held his gaze 2 seconds longer than was comfortable. Then she nodded, turned, and walked back to the floor. She told herself it was not what it sounded like. She had been telling herself that for months. The problem was, it kept sounding the same. The following afternoon, during the mid-shift lull, Dale Hutchins, a regular, heavy-set, early 40s, always at the counter with his friend Benny, always the meatloaf special, made a comment while Kendra was refilling his coffee. She had said something light to the man beside him, a small, conversational nothing, the kind of remark that keeps the air moving in a diner. Dale set his fork down and said, without looking at her, "If she was that good, she wouldn't be here." His friend said nothing, did not disagree. Kendra set the coffee pot down and walked back to the counter. Her face said nothing. But Priscilla Watts was watching. Priscilla was a retired school administrator who came in most afternoons for pie and a crossword. She had been watching for several weeks, the way administrators watch, cataloging without comment, because the thing about administrators is they have spent careers noticing patterns that individuals call isolated incidents. She opened the Notes app on her phone and wrote the date. She wrote what Dale said. She added a line about what she had seen Victor do 2 days before. Hand Kendra a broom and tell her to sweep the parking lot before she left, as a statement and not a request, while another employee stood idle at the counter, scrolling her phone. She had asked Kendra about it gently, over pie that afternoon. Kendra had smiled and said it was fine. It was not fine. The week after the schedule change, the side work doubled. Kendra stayed 40-plus minutes past the end of her shift 3 nights running, cleaning prep surfaces that were supposed to be distributed among closing staff. She said nothing, because the alternative had already shown itself to be a one-direction conversation. The moment at the napkin station was what stopped being containable. She was restocking dispensers on a Wednesday afternoon when Victor came to stand beside her. Too close. The proximity of someone who knows they have the power to make you uncomfortable and has chosen to use it. He looked over her work. He found nothing wrong. He stayed anyway. When 2 regulars nearby glanced over, he said, perfectly conversational, carrying easily to both tables, "Some of us need more supervision than others." One regular looked down at his coffee. The other excused himself to the restroom. Kendra kept restocking the dispensers. At the back of the room, a young woman named Yolanda was wiping down the far counter. 24 years old, closing shift, 3 weeks in. She had a small black and white composition notebook in her apron pocket. She had started keeping it 10 days ago, when she had understood that she was watching something that someone needed to record. She wrote the time. She wrote the exact words. She wrote, 2 regulars present, neither responded. And at his corner table, The man in the gray jacket set his newspaper face down on the table. He had stopped observing and started deciding. He picked up his coffee cup and wrapped both hands around it. He was thinking about a receipt, a specific one, folded in his inside jacket pocket, from a place called the Route 9 Cafe in Galloway, Ohio. Over 4 years ago. He had been traveling sick, bad flu, worst decision to be on the road, and the server who brought his soup had brought him something he had not ordered. A cup of broth, set down without comment, told him it was on the house. He had kept the receipt because he had meant to write a letter. He never did. But he still had it. He looked at Kendra moving through the floor, straight-backed, steady, carrying what had just happened the same way she carried every other thing, which was without letting it change her step. He was almost certain. He needed one more day. It was a Friday. Fridays at Maple Grove ran the loose, unpredictable churn of people who had made it to the end of the week and wanted something familiar. Tables turned too fast, orders stacked before the previous ones cleared. The kitchen ran 3 minutes behind on everything. Kendra had been on her feet since 6. It was almost 2. She had eaten a granola bar at 9:30, standing up, 4 bites. Her lower back had been hurting since noon, the slow, constant ache that had taken up permanent residence over the last 2 months, and she had been quietly adjusting her posture all day to work around it. Riley had coughed through the night. Not the dry, manageable kind, the tight kind, the one that sat in the chest and cost something to get past. Kendra had sat on the edge of the mattress and rubbed slow circles on her daughter's back until it eased. She had been awake by 3:30, lying in the dark, running numbers that did not add up no matter how she rearranged them. She was, in the plainest terms, running out of everything at once. She picked up a full tray from the pass-through window. 4 plates, heavy, both arms required. She had done it hundreds of times. She moved across the floor, threading between a chair pulled too far out and a toddler standing in a booth seat, eyes on her path, right arm steady, left arm compensating. She did not see the wet spot. Her foot caught the edge of it. Spilled water near table 7. No sign posted, nobody had flagged it. And she went sideways. Not fully down, but enough. The tray torqued in her grip, and 2 plates hit the floor, then 2 more. And the sound was enormous in the way only diner silence following diner noise can be. Sudden, absolute. The whole room going still at once. Kendra stood in it. Ceramic in pieces around her feet. Food splattered across the laminate. She was breathing hard, more from the catch than the fall. Victor was at the far end of the counter. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for months, like she was a conclusion he had already reached. "You're done." Not loud. He did not need to be loud. "Victor." Her voice held level. "I slipped on water that wasn't—" "I said you're done, Kendra." He moved toward her, and as he stepped past the broken plates, he did not step around them. His foot caught the edge of 2 larger shards and scattered them outward, closer to where she was standing, widening the radius of the mess, making it look worse, making more of it center on her. She saw him do it. She was nearly certain 3 other people saw it, too. Nobody said so. She crouched down and began picking up pieces by hand. Then Riley was beside her. She had been in the corner booth, the Friday habit going back years. Homework at the quiet table while her mother finished her shift. Kendra had not seen her move. She only heard the cough first. Hard, tight, the one that sat deep in the chest and didn't loosen easy. Riley pressed her fist against her sternum the way she had learned to. Her inhaler was in her backpack across the room. She had known since noon that it was nearly empty. She had been measuring her breathing in small, careful increments for hours and had said nothing about any of it. She was crying. Quietly, the way children cry when they have decided to be brave about it, tears moving but no sound. And she was using the hem of her purple hoodie to wipe the tile beside her mother. "Baby." Kendra's voice broke on the word. Just slightly. Just once. Stop. Don't do that. Riley did not stop. She coughed again, harder, pressed her fist tighter against her chest, and kept wiping the floor with her free hand. Kendra looked at her daughter's face. She looked at the broken plates around them. She looked at the room, at the phones up, most of them recording, at the faces watching with the expression of people who are moved and have decided that being moved is enough. No one set a phone down. No one pushed back a chair. Victor stood several feet away and said nothing. The room was doing what rooms do when they have chosen a side, staying quiet, pointing cameras, waiting. Kendra set down the pieces she was holding. She put her arm around her daughter and pulled her close, and Riley pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and finally let the breath out. That tight, expensive breath she had been holding for the last 30 seconds. The one that had cost her something to hold. The man in the corner booth had not raised his phone. His hands were flat on the table. He was watching Kendra. Steady, the way you watch something when you have been building toward a decision for several days and have now arrived at it. He looked at Riley. He looked at the backpack across the room with the nearly empty inhaler inside it. He looked at Victor. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. He looked at it for one moment. He put it back. Then he stood up. He did not hurry. That was the first thing the room registered, that he moved like someone who had made a decision rather than someone reacting to one. He set his coffee cup down on the saucer, tucked the folded newspaper under his arm, and crossed the floor with the unhurried certainty of a man who stopped being in a hurry a long time ago. Kendra was still on her knees, Riley pressed against her side, one hand making slow circles on her daughter's back. Not medicine, but something. He crouched beside Kendra and reached over, closing his hand gently around her wrist before she could reach for another shard. "You don't have to do that," he said. Quiet. No performance in it. Kendra looked at him, steady, giving nothing away yet. He held the look. "Either of you." He looked at Riley, whose face had lifted slightly at his voice. "You need your inhaler, sweetheart?" Riley gave one tight nod. He stood, crossed to the corner booth, picked up Riley's backpack himself, and brought it back. He held it out to her. She looked at her mother. Kendra gave a small nod. Riley took it. The room had gone quiet in a different way than before. Not the silence of a crowd pretending not to witness something. The silence of a crowd that had stopped pretending. Victor had moved to the far end of the counter. His expression had shifted. Not alarmed exactly, but recalibrating. The way a man recalibrates when a situation has started moving in a direction he did not plan for. "Sir," he said, "this is an employee matter." "I heard what you said." The man did not turn around. He was still looking at Kendra, his voice unchanged. "About her place." He straightened then. He turned and looked at Victor, and the look was the opposite of theatrical. No anger in it, no threat. Just stillness, which turned out to be more unsettling than anything louder would have been. "Not everyone here," he said, "is what they seem." He reached into his inside jacket pocket and produced the folded piece of paper. He unfolded it once, looked at it briefly, and set it on the nearest clean table. It was a receipt. Old, thermal ink slightly faded at the edges, from a place called the Route 9 Cafe in Galloway, Ohio. Date in the upper corner, over 4 years back. Total, $11.40. A bowl of soup and a coffee. At the bottom, in the slightly slanted script of someone who had signed hundreds of slips a week. Kendra. She stared at it. She looked at the date. At her own handwriting. She had worked at Route 9 for 8 months before it closed. Double shifts, Riley barely 4, the months running together, the work more present in her memory than the calendar. She did not remember this specific slip, but she remembered the place. She remembered some night among many nights when a man had come in looking sick and she had brought him a cup of broth he hadn't ordered and told him it was on the house, and she had not thought about it again. She looked up at him. He was watching her with the expression of a man who has been in the process of confirming something for several days and is now confirmed. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. He walked to the front door and stepped outside. Through the window, the room watched him on the sidewalk. Plain gray jacket, phone to his ear, body language of someone giving instructions rather than asking for them. He spoke for less than a minute. He glanced back through the glass once, briefly. The only sounds inside were the ventilation fan and a truck somewhere on Maple Avenue. Priscilla Watts was looking at the receipt on the table. She was thinking about the notes in her phone. She was thinking about Yolanda's notebook, which she did not know about yet, but which existed, 3 tables away in an apron pocket, containing everything she had not been present to see. Dale Hutchins set his coffee mug down and did not pick it up again. Victor crossed his arms. "Nobody here needs to get dramatic about..." "Victor." Priscilla said it flat. Said it like a period. No sentence before it or after it. Just his name, delivered with the full weight of every afternoon she had spent in this diner, watching what she had been watching. Victor stopped talking. Riley sat in the corner booth with her inhaler, breathing more steadily. She looked at her mother. Kendra was still holding the receipt, turning it in her hands, looking at her own handwriting from 4 years ago. The signature she had written 1,000 times on a slip from a place she had almost forgotten. The front door opened. The man walked back in. He did not wait to be invited. He walked to the center of the diner, not the aggressive center of someone demanding space, but the natural point in a room where people look when they have decided to listen. And he stood there and said, "I think it's time to be clear about a few things." His voice was the same as it had always been. Level. Unhurried. The voice of someone who had learned that volume is what people use when they do not already have the room. "My name is Darius Ford." The name moved through the room. Some people sat forward immediately. Others took a breath and a beat, then did the same. Darius Ford, founder of North Root Foods, 63 organic grocery locations across 12 states. Started with $1,100 and a commercial lease he'd had to co-sign twice because the bank didn't like his credit history. His face was on the cover of a business magazine currently sitting in the rack by the Maple Grove Diner register, approximately 2 feet from where Victor Kane was standing. Victor turned and looked at the rack. He looked at the man. He looked at the rack again. Phones that had been recording were now live streaming. The woman in scrubs straightened in her chair. A young man by the window typed rapidly and then looked back up. Someone near the rear booth said, clearly audible, "Oh my God." Darius did not acknowledge any of it. He looked at Kendra. 6 weeks, he said. That is how long your wages have been withheld. It was not a question. I know, he continued, because I have spent this past week speaking to your current coworkers, former coworkers, and your landlord, who was kind enough to take my call this morning. A pause. $48. 2 days remaining. Kendra's hand was pressed flat on the table beside her. Her face was in that specific place between comprehension and the inability to fully arrive at it. The expression of someone who has been bracing against impact for so long that the sudden absence of something to brace against takes a moment to process as real. I'm going to take care of that right now, Darius said. He took his phone from his jacket, opened an application. He did not narrate it, did not look around to see who was watching. He entered a figure, reviewed it once, reviewed it again, and turned the screen toward Kendra before pressing send. The amount was not only the 6 weeks of withheld wages. It included the hours quietly reduced without documentation, the hours of unpaid side work over 8 weeks, and an additional figure for what Yolanda's notebook would later formally establish as discriminatory labor distribution. He had a complete number. He had done the work of arriving at it before he ever stood up from that corner booth. Kendra looked at the screen for a long time. Then she nodded. He pressed send. The transfer confirmed in 4 seconds. Victor had been working through a visible sequence of composure failures, crossed arms, and the expression of a man who considered this an overreaction. Then failed interjections, during which the room consistently failed to make space for his voice. Then recalculation. Now his face had arrived somewhere pale and specific, the look of a man who recognizes the texture of an ending and is not prepared for it. Listen. He cleared his throat. I run a legitimate business. There may have been some miscommunication about how... Darius looked at him. Just looked at him. The full, settled gaze of someone who has heard that precise sentence in several variations across many years and is not going to honor it with any pretense of uncertainty about what it is. You should start, Darius said quietly, by cleaning this mess. A slight gesture toward the floor. The broken plates still scattered near table 7, the food on the tile, the wet spot near the spill where no sign had ever appeared. Victor did not move. The room waited. Victor. Priscilla. Same tone. Just his name. He looked at the room, at the phones, at his own face on the magazine cover 2 feet away, at Kendra, who stood straight-backed beside her daughter, saying nothing, her face closed. The face of someone who has decided, finally and completely, that she is done carrying things that were never hers to carry. He looked at the floor. He reached behind the counter for the dustpan. He crouched down. And the room, which had been suspended in that airless state of a crowd that has not yet named what it is witnessing, released something. Not applause. Something quieter. A collective breath coming back into bodies that had been holding it. Darius had already stepped away from the center of the room. He was by the window, phone to his ear again, voice low. The call lasted just over 2 minutes. By the time it ended, a white county vehicle had pulled to the curb outside, its agency seal visible through the front glass. The labor inspector's name was Carla Reyes. She came in with a clipboard and the lanyard and took one look at the room before her eyes settled on Priscilla Watts, who was already standing and walking toward her with the Notes app open on her phone. I understand there are records I need to see, Carla said. Victor was still on the floor. The inspection lasted most of the afternoon. Carla Reyes had been in this work for 19 years. She had developed the specific skill of walking into a space and reading in under a minute what had been happening there for months. She moved through the diner with her clipboard, asked questions in the tone of someone who already knew the answers, and was creating the opportunity for truth to be spoken on the record. She sat with Yolanda for 45 minutes in the back booth. Yolanda spread her notebook on the table and went through it page by page. Dates, times, specific statements, scheduling changes, photographs of the posted side work assignments, the disparity in how those assignments had been distributed. She had started keeping it 10 weeks ago when she had understood that what was happening to Kendra was not a series of separate incidents. She was 24, had a year of community college business coursework behind her, and she had done her job extremely well. Carla read through the notebook twice. She photographed several pages. She asked Yolanda 3 follow-up questions, each more precise than the last. The violations, once itemized, were not subtle. Withheld wages across multiple employees, undocumented mandatory labor, altered timesheets, a discrepancy that emerged when Carla compared the printed scheduling logs against the digital backup and found they did not match across 3 specific pay periods. There were also 2 former employees, both women, both minorities, one still owed a final payment she had never received, whose cases Yolanda had included in the back pages of the notebook on the chance that someone would eventually ask. Victor Kane sat in his own office, on his own side of his own desk, and for the first time in years looked like the smaller figure in the room. Carla read him the preliminary findings with the practiced even-handedness of someone uninterested in drama. He would have the opportunity to respond, would engage legal counsel. The process would take the time it required. The preliminary findings included multiple counts of wage theft, discriminatory distribution of uncompensated labor, and falsified time records, which carried its own separate and significant weight. The fines were substantial. The legal exposure was worse. The Maple Grove Diner itself became a complication. Victor carried a business loan extended twice and a mortgage on the building. His attorney, reached by phone at 4:30 that afternoon, said nothing encouraging. The diner was on the market within 2 weeks. It listed for 11 days. Darius Ford acquired it through a subsidiary. North Root Foods had been studying the Crestwood area for 6 months, mapping food access gaps in underserved Ohio communities, and Maple Grove sat at the center of 3 metrics his team had been tracking since spring. He called Kendra on a Tuesday morning from a Columbus number. She was home with Riley, who had a pulmonologist appointment scheduled for that week. The one postponed 3 times, now set, now covered. Kendra picked up and sat down in the kitchen chair she always used when she expected a call would require sitting. Darius laid out the proposal. The diner would reopen under a revised model: community diner, local sourcing pilot. One of the anchor investments North Root was expanding into underserved markets. He needed someone to manage it who knew the neighborhood, knew the regulars, understood how the floor actually worked. The position came with a salary he named, more than double what she had been making with tips included. Full health insurance, dental, vision. Riley's pulmonologist would be in network. "You would be building something," he said, "not running someone else's." Silence on the line. Why me? Not self-doubt. The careful question of a woman who had learned not to walk through doors without understanding what was behind them. "Because I watched you work," he said. "Because you kept doing your job with everything happening around you. Because a woman I didn't know once brought a sick man something warm and didn't ask for anything in return." He paused. "And because you have someone who seems like she would be very good at holding people accountable." Another silence. "Okay," Kendra said. She hired Yolanda as assistant manager before the week was out. She walked every inch of the diner with her own notebook during the renovation window, reading Carla's full report with the attention of someone who had lived on the wrong side of every citation and had no intention of reproducing a single one. She built the staffing schedule herself, documented everything, tracked overtime to the minute, and posted the side work rotation on a sheet that was signed, dated, and visible from the counter. 1 week before the reopening, Dale Hutchins appeared at the front door. The entrance was propped open, fresh paint drying, new signage going up overhead. He stood there for a moment, looking at Kendra, who was at the counter with a clipboard. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the floor. "I'm sorry," he said. No framing, no explanation attached, just the thing itself. Kendra looked at him for a moment. "Come back when we open," she said. "I'll have Yolanda get you a table." The diner opened on a Wednesday morning. Not a Monday, which would have felt like proving something. Not a Saturday, which would have felt like a party. A Wednesday. A work day. The genuine kind. The kind that did not need an occasion to justify it. Kendra had been there since 5:30. She had not planned to come in that early. She had set her alarm for 5, told herself she would take her time, make Riley a real breakfast before the neighbor came to watch her. Maybe even sit down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and just breathe for 10 minutes before the day started. She had not done any of that. She had been dressed and out the door by 5:15, driven by the specific restlessness of someone who has waited a long time for something and cannot quite believe it has arrived and needs to be in the room where it is happening just to confirm it is real. She stood inside the empty diner for a few minutes before she turned on any lights. She stood in the dark with the smell of fresh paint and new countertop laminate and the ghost of 50,000 breakfasts soaked into the walls, and she listened to the building settle around her. The radiator clicked in the back corner, the same radiator that had been clicking since the first morning she ever worked here 6 years ago, the one she used to curse under her breath in January when it couldn't keep up with the cold. It was still here. She had asked Darius not to replace it. Some things you keep because they are the record of how far you have come. She turned on the lights, tied her apron, and went to work. By 9 o'clock, there was a line outside. Not because a press release had gone out. Darius had not issued one, and Kendra had asked him not to. But because Crestwood was the kind of town where word moves on its own current, and what had been moving for 5 weeks was not simply the story of a billionaire stepping in. It was the story of Yolanda's notebook and Priscilla's phone notes, and the man in the gray jacket who had carried a coffee receipt for 4 years without being entirely sure why. And it was the story of Riley Ellis, 8 years old, who had walked across a diner floor with a crumpled medical bill and done the one thing everyone around her had been carefully avoiding. Refused to pretend. The community had opinions about all of it. Most of those opinions showed up in line by 9 in the morning on a Wednesday. Kendra worked the floor herself for the first 2 hours. Not because the staff needed her to. She had hired well, trained carefully, and the morning was running cleanly. But because she wanted to. She knew where the awkward angles were between the tables. She knew which regulars liked the window and which needed the booth to stay quiet. She set plates down with the same deliberateness she always had, but something about the motion was different now, more fully inhabited. The weight in it and the ease in it arriving together rather than one masking the other. The regulars noticed. Not all of them said anything. Most of them didn't need to. There was a woman named Gloria, 70s, silver hair always pinned back, who had been coming in for the Tuesday special for as long as Kendra could remember, and who had, on one of the worst weeks of the past 6 weeks, quietly left a $20 bill under her coffee cup and written on the back of her receipt, "I see you." 2 words, no signature. Gloria came in at 9:15 this Wednesday, sat in her usual spot by the window, and when Kendra brought her coffee, she reached over and put her hand briefly over Kendra's bandaged knuckles and said nothing. Kendra pressed her lips together, nodded once, and moved on to the next table. She did not cry. She had decided she would not cry today, not because crying would be wrong, but because today she wanted to feel the good of it cleanly, without grief mixed in, and she had earned the right to choose that. The morning moved fast, faster than she expected, and full in a way that was different from the full of being overwhelmed and undermanned. This was the full of a room working right. Orders landing on time, staff covering each other without being asked, a kitchen that wasn't 3 minutes behind on everything. At 10:15, Yolanda came out of the back to let Kendra know the prep was ahead of schedule and asked if she wanted to take 5 minutes. Kendra said yes, which was itself a new thing. She had not said yes to 5 minutes in 6 years. She went to the back corridor and stood by the window that looked out onto the alley and the strip of sky above the neighboring building. The October light was doing something particular at that angle, cutting in low, making the bricks on the opposite wall look warm in a way they never looked in summer. She stood there and breathed. In and out, deliberate. The kind of breathing you only do when you've spent a long time breathing like something might be taken from you mid-exhale, and have finally, cautiously, started to believe it won't be. She thought about her mother. Her mother had cleaned houses for 31 years and had never once called in sick, had come home with her knees aching and her hands raw, and had still made dinner, still asked about Kendra's day, still laughed at something on the television before bed. Kendra had spent a long time thinking about that as sacrifice. Standing here now, she thought maybe it was also the same thing she was feeling this morning. The specific satisfaction of a person who has built something with their hands and knows, at the cellular level, that it holds. She hoped her mother could see it. She thought she probably could. A little after 10, Riley came through the back. Dropped off after a late start. A teacher planning day, a Wednesday gift. She had her backpack, her lunch bag, and a new navy hoodie she had picked out herself at the store on Saturday. No stains, no red warning stripes on anything in her pockets. She paused at the kitchen door, taking in the room the way she always took things in, wide-eyed, processing, deciding how she felt about it before she showed anything. Kendra watched her from across the floor, watched her daughter look at the counter, at the new menu board, at Yolanda behind the pass-through giving her a small wave, at the booths filling steadily with people. Something in Riley's face went from careful to certain. She nodded to herself, the nod of an 8-year-old who has rendered a verdict, and walked to the corner booth. Same one. The maple syrup smell was still there, despite 2 weeks of cleaning, which she considered a promising sign. She pulled out her homework. She lasted 4 minutes before she looked up. "Mom?" Kendra glanced over from the neighboring table. "Homework." "I know." Riley reached into the front pocket of her backpack. She pulled out a piece of paper, folded twice, softened at the creases, one corner still carrying a faint ghost of red where the overdue stripe had printed. She held it the way she had held it the first time, except now her hands were completely still. "I kept it," she said. "I put it back in the drawer when you weren't looking, just in case." She looked at it, then at her mother. "I guess we don't need it anymore." Kendra crossed the floor and slid into the booth across from her. She took the paper, unfolded it the way Riley had, looking at the number in faded red, $48, and the pharmacy's name and the account number she had stared at too many times in the dark. She held it for a moment. $48. The number that had sat in the back of her throat for 2 weeks like something she couldn't swallow. The number she had done arithmetic around at 3 in the morning, moving it against other numbers, trying to make it smaller by rearranging the problem. $48 was Riley's medication. $48 was 3 shifts of tips on a slow week. $48 was the distance between where they were and where things got worse. And it had been enormous. And now it was just a number printed in faded red ink on a piece of paper her daughter had kept in a kitchen drawer, just in case. She folded it back down, all the way, and put it in her apron pocket. She did not throw it away. There are things you keep, not because you still need them, but because you earned the right to carry them. Because they are the record of a time when you did not break, when you kept choosing to be decent in circumstances that would have forgiven you for being otherwise. The bill was not a wound anymore. It was a document. Kendra was the kind of woman who understood the difference. Riley was watching her with the careful attention she had inherited, those eyes that took everything in before saying anything. She wanted to know if her mother was okay. She had been wanting to know that for a long time. "You were brave," Kendra said, "walking in here like that." Riley considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "I was scared." That's what brave is. Riley thought about it, accepted it. Then, in the way of children who have processed a thing and are ready to move on to the next one, "Do you think I could get the oatmeal?" Kendra looked at her for a moment. Then she laughed, a real one, the full-bodied kind that she had not heard coming out of herself in long enough that it surprised her. Riley grinned, the particular grin of a child who has successfully made her mother laugh and knows it. Kendra reached across the table and tugged the hem of the navy hoodie once, lightly, before she stood. "Apple walnut," she said. "I'll put the order in myself." Riley turned back to her homework, satisfied. At the counter, a new employee named Marcus was being walked through the closing checklist. Not handed a broom and told, but walked through, step by step, with a reason attached to each item and a printed copy he could keep. He was 20, had applied 3 times before getting called back, and had shown up 20 minutes early every day that week. Kendra had noticed. She had not said so yet. She would, when the moment was right. Not as a formal reward, just as acknowledgement, because acknowledgement was what she had wished someone had offered her. And she had decided that what you wish you had been given is a reasonable place to begin. Priscilla Watts was in her regular spot, crossword open. She had already declared the apple walnut oatmeal the best decision she had made all month. She would be back Thursday. She would be back Friday. She would bring 4 different people before the weekend and tell each of them a slightly different version of the same story, all of them true. The story spread through Crestwood and into the county, and eventually onto the regional evening news in a segment that ran at 6:30 on a Thursday. It was the story of a woman who worked in a place that took from her, and other people who saw it and wrote it down, and an 8-year-old girl who walked across a diner floor with a crumpled bill, and none of them stayed quiet. Outside, through the front window, the late October sun was doing what Ohio autumn sun does in the late morning, arriving sideways, low and golden, catching the steam off the coffee cups on the counter and the dust near the door, making the whole front wall glow. Kendra glanced up from the register and caught it. She stood with her hand resting on the counter and the full sound of the room behind her, silverware finding its place, a child laughing at the back table, the hum of a room being used for exactly what it was meant for. She let it be exactly that for 2 seconds. Then someone across the room raised a hand for a refill, and she picked up the pot, and she went.